Welcome to the 700 Club, the worst weekend of terror attacks in Israel in a decade. A brutal assault on a Jerusalem synagogue left 7 people dead Friday as they celebrated the Shabbat on Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Well, on Saturday, a 13-year-old Palestinian boy shot and wounded a Jewish father and son. These attacks are overshadowing Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's visit to Israel today and most likely will radically change his agenda. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
On Friday night, a Palestinian gunman killed 7 and wounded 3 others. The dead ranged in age from 14 to 68, including a couple who tried to help the victims. The terror attack took place outside the Ateret Avraham synagogue behind me in the Jerusalem suburb of Neve Yaakov. The attack took place when Jews here were celebrating the Sabbath and also while the world was commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Very difficult for us. I talked with some friends here. They say me it was very, very heavy. They hear the shot. One of them want to go down to see what happened and lost his life.
After the shootings, Palestinians celebrated in Jenin, Nablus, Gaza, and eastern Jerusalem with fireworks and passing out sweets. Another attack took place Saturday in the city of David when a 13-year-old Palestinian boy fired at a Jewish family, wounding a father and son. The attacker was shot and wounded when the family returned fire. On Sunday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced new steps to increase security.
On one hand, we're increasing the deployment and activity of the security forces, and on the other hand, we're exacting a heavy price from terror perpetrators and their supporters.
Netanyahu also addressed measures in the West Bank.
We'll soon decide on steps to strengthen settlements in Judea and Samaria in order to convey a message to the terrorists that seek to uproot us from our land, that we're here to stay.
Other steps include revoking Israeli identity cards and residency of families of terrorists, and expanding and expediting weapons permits to thousands of Israeli civilians. The deadly weekend will likely change Secretary Blinken's agenda.
Before the visit, there was a lot of talk about judicial reform. There was a lot of talk about can we revive the two-state solution or bring it up a level. I think that's pretty much out the window for this visit. What he's got to do now is indicating support for Israel, indicating their horror that the terror attacks happened, and trying to urge both sides to calm tensions down. I really think that's become the primary goal now.
Blinken is due to meet with Israeli leaders here in Jerusalem today and Palestinian leaders in Ramallah tomorrow. And Gordon, he's actually meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right now.
Well, Chris, there's been an escalation of the violence in the past few weeks. So it just boggles my mind that in the Palestinian territories, you would see, I assume that was a police officer handing out sweets, celebration in the streets. Does the Palestinian Authority have any control over these militant groups, or are they actually encouraging them?
Well, they're both. They don't have control over many of these groups, Gordon, especially in places like the northern West Bank. In fact, recently, we did a report on that because the vacuum of the Palestinian Authority, many of these terror groups are rising. One analyst told us that Israel's sitting on a volcano because of the lack of control the PA has in much of the West Bank. So he doesn't control groups like Hamas or Islamic Jihad. In fact, Gordon, they're rivals, and they pose a threat to the PA. So what Mahmoud Abbas is doing is he's launching a diplomatic war against Israel on the one hand, like places like the International Court of Justice, but on the other hand, he's afraid of these groups, of reining them in. And you also said, you mentioned they're actually encouraging these kind of attacks. Fatah, which is part of the PA, said this. He said that we greet and bless those heroic operations in Jerusalem by the heroes of Jerusalem. And so comments like that and the incitement on the Palestinian media, they play a big role in these kind of terror attacks.
All right, well, let's turn to Iran. Well, Wall Street Journal is reporting that Israel carried out a drone attack on a military compound there. So what role is Iran playing in the background of all of this?
Well, actually, they have a big role in the West Bank right now. One analyst we interviewed recently said Iranian fingerprints are all over the current escalation in Judea and Samaria by funding, supplying, and guiding. And so another analyst said that, you know, the West Bank is sort of like a volcano ready to explode. And by the way, that drone attack took place in Isfahan. That's a major center for missile production and also nuclear research. Iran says they shot down most of those drones, but that one got through. But they say it only did minor damage. And Gordon, that's important to note. Actually, last week, it was the largest joint military exercise between the U.S. and Israel. It was called Juniper Oak. It was unprecedented in its scale, and it's sending a message to Iran that the U.S. and Israel, perhaps, are ready to strike Iran's nuclear facilities.
How likely do you think that is? I mean, do you really think that there will be some kind of strike? And would it be effective? It seems to me the Iranians are absolutely trying to harden that facility and then disperse it so one particular area is not vulnerable. If you hit one, are you hitting a dozen or more that contain the material?
That's really those two things. The fact that they're hardened with you need bunker-busting bombs to get some of these facilities, and they're spread throughout Iran. So that Iran knows they're doing that to prevent any sort of attack by the U.S. or Israel. I think what it's really doing right now, since it was so unprecedented in scale, just sending a message to Iran to limit its nuclear production. We'll see if that works. Whether or not Israel attacks Iran, it's been a question for years and years, Gordon. We don't know the answer to that just yet.
All right. Well, in the category of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, Saudi Arabia is a player here. So how big is the restoration of the relationship, both for the Biden administration and for Israel? Is Israel able to help the Biden administration reestablish close ties with Saudi Arabia?
Well, ironically, they can. They can be like a marriage mediator between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. And I think that may be one of the items on Blinken's agenda right now, is trying to repair this relationship. And Israel is key to that. You know, Biden has really alienated the Saudis by talking them they're a pariah nation. But Netanyahu has a fairly good relationship with Saudi Arabia. He wants them to come into the Abraham Accords. There was recently a Jewish group that went to Saudi Arabia, met with many of the leaders, and their message was Saudi Arabia wants to come into the Abraham Accords, normalize relations with Israel, but the key is they want to have good relations with the U.S., and that's where Netanyahu can become this player, this mediator between Saudi Arabia and the U.S.
Well, let's hope the family counseling goes well. There's a reason it's called the Abraham Accords. They're all brothers. So, Chris, thanks for the report. In other news, Memphis had peaceful protests, which is absolutely a miracle. And the video of the Memphis police officers beating Tyron Nichols, I mean, he's a photographer, he's an artist, and what in the world are they doing? It's generating more calls for federal police reform. John Jessup has that story and more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That is right, Gordon. As protesters turned out in cities across the United States over the weekend, politicians took to the airwaves to debate solutions. Meanwhile, the city of Memphis took action against the unit formed to bring security to dangerous neighborhoods. Dale Hurd reports.
The Memphis Police Department has permanently shut down the Scorpion Unit, which stands for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods, after releasing videos showing officers viciously attacking Tyre Nichols. Memphis authorities released more than an hour of the footage Friday showing officers striking and kicking Nichols repeatedly as he screamed for his mother.
Watch out! I'm gonna baton the f*** out you!
5 of the officers from the unit were fired and charged with second-degree murder in the death of the 29-year-old Nichols during a January 7th traffic stop. Nichols died 3 days later in a hospital. Protesters took to the streets in Memphis and across the country this weekend demanding police reform. And the attorney for the Nichols family claims the incident highlights the need to reform law enforcement.
It doesn't matter if the officers are black, Hispanic, or white. It's part of the culture. The implicit bias police culture that exists in America.
Democrats in Washington are calling for revival of federal legislation that was previously stalled in the Senate to reform policing standards nationwide.
We've got to change this for the better, by screening, by training, by accreditation.
But House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan says new legislation won't prevent incidents like what happened to Tyree Nichols.
We're not getting enough good people applying because of the disparagement on police officers. There's been this defund the police concept out there. There's been this attack on law enforcement.
It really starts with hiring, making sure that we are bringing in the right men and women to do the job.
Attorneys for the 5 black police officers say they're innocent of the charges against them, and at least some of the officers plan to plead not guilty. The Nichols family is preparing for a funeral on Wednesday. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thank you, Dale. Well, police in the city of Alhambra, California, recognized a hero this past weekend. Officials awarded Brandon Tsai a Medal of Courage for his actions in disarming the gunman who killed 11 people at a dance hall earlier this month. Tsai confronted and stopped the shooter as he tried to enter a second dance hall, saving the lives of those inside. Well, the stage is set for Super Bowl 57. The NFC champion Philadelphia Eagles will face the AFC's Kansas City Chiefs. Philadelphia cruised to victory over San Francisco Sunday, 31-7. The Chiefs, though, had a little bit of a tougher time, beating the Cincinnati Bengals in the final seconds with a field goal. The two teams will compete for football's Lombardi Trophy in Glendale, Arizona, in about 2 weeks, Sunday, February 12th. Meanwhile, Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin released his first public comment Sunday, posting a video on Instagram thanking medical staff for saving his life after suffering cardiac arrest on the field. The calamity spurred millions to pray on his behalf. Damar says God has a purpose for it all.
What happened to me on Monday Night Football, I feel is a direct example of God using me as a vessel to share my passion and my love directly from my heart with the entire world. And with God's guidance, I will continue to do wonderful and great things.
What an incredible testimony and platform, Gordon, this young man has.
Damar's an example for us all, and it's wonderful that he's recognizing that you can have this kind of near-death experience, but what is the overall purpose? Well, instead of saying, why did this happen to me, he's saying, I want to use this for God's glory. That's wonderful, a wonderful response. It's for a Monday night football game to turn into, instead of a National Football League, it turned into the National Prayer League. Everything stopped down as we prayed for his recovery, and it's wonderful to see him recovered and speaking and declaring, yes, this is what God did for me.